Every year, millions visit zoos to marvel at unique wildlife, but behind the bars lies an untamable instinct. This episode uncovers the most chilling stories of zoo animal attacks that ended in tragedy, revealing crucial safety oversights that could save lives. Zoos offer a rare chance to witness wild creatures firsthand, yet no matter how placid they may appear, their instincts remain untamed all too often. This crucial fact is overlooked today. We delve into some of the most harrowing animal park incidents ever documented. Let's begin. July 14, 2012, was a bright Saturday in Brazil's rural São Paulo state. The midday heat hung thick over red clay paths and palmland fields near Itatuba, a quiet municipality known more for its sugar cane fields than for attracting tourists. However, just outside the city lay a modest privatelian zoological park called Recanto Animal. Locals knew it as a place to encounter exotic species intimately, sometimes far too intimately. Recanto Animal opened in 1999 as a family-operated venture, initially showcasing rescued farm animals and local wildlife. Over the years, it grew rapidly, incorporating exotic beasts like large felines, primates, and reptiles without the necessary infrastructure or regulatory oversight typical of larger accredited institutions. The park heavily relied on weekend visitors and promoted a more personal animal viewing experience than conventional zoos. While it had avoided major incidents in the past, its safety protocols had faced quiet criticism from animal welfare organizations for years, citing minimal staff training, outdated enclosures, and inadequate emergency planning. That morning, a 34-year-old school administrator from Campinas arrived at the facility with her spouse and two young offspring. The visit had been a long-promised excursion, loosely planned for a month, but only finalized the day before as a way to celebrate their daughter Clara's 7th birthday with a demanding school year behind them and schedule often packed. The family had few opportunities for a day trip together, had discovered the park online through a local parent forum, and was drawn by its promise of interactive displays, close animal encounters, and a relaxed family-friendly setting. Something simple yet memorable for her children. Was known for her meticulous and sensible nature, a devoted parent, and a respected member of her community. At her elementary school, teachers sought her counsel and parents trusted her implicitly. She avoided risks and was often described as composed and responsible. Her decision to visit Recanto Animal had been thoroughly researched, or so she believed. The facility was compact, under 10 acres, yet boasted significant attractions: monkeys, pumas, leopards, and even a full-grown Bengal tiger. But the main draw was its pair of African lions housed in a spacious open enclosure, with a raised wooden observation deck above. The design offered visitors a clear overhead perspective of the lions below, separated by roughly a 10-foot drop, and a reinforced fence that encircled the habitat. At 1:45 p.m., after a midday meal in the shaded picnic zone, and her family joined a group of other sightseers on the elevated platform above the lion habitat. The wooden railing at the deck's edge was built to standard height, but lacked any supplementary safety barriers or netting to prevent mishaps. Several children pressed against the railing for a better view of the big cats. The African lion ranks among Earth's most recognizable predators. Social, territorial, and powerfully built. Adult males can exceed 500 pounds and deliver a bite force of approximately 650 pounds per square inch, capable of easily shattering bone. A lion's primary hunting tools are its immense musculature, retractable claws, and mighty jaws, which it uses to suffocate or disable prey. Though captive lions have no need to hunt, their predatory instincts remain, and any perceived territorial invasion can provoke an immediate violent reaction. Unlike large felines that favor stealth, lions are known for their explosive assaults. Fast, overwhelming, and designed to end a struggle swiftly. Clara climbed onto the railing's lower beam, trying to peer over and down into the enclosure, where Nero, a 6-year-old male lion, rested in partial shade, stepped forward, and reached for her daughter's waist to pull her down. In doing so, her foot slipped on the worn wooden planks, and she lost her footing with nothing to grasp, tipped forward, and fell over the railing, landing hard inside the enclosure. Below, the drop was approximately 18 feet, struck the ground on her left side, fracturing her pelvis, and dazing her. Upon impact, for several moments, she lay motionless. Nero rose almost instantly, his attention drawn by the sudden motion and sound. As tried to sit up, Nero approached, closing the distance in seconds. He struck her across the back with a full-force swipe of his paw, knocking her face-first into the dirt. The impact tore through skin and muscle, leaving deep lacerations across her shoulder and ribs. As she attempted to crawl away, he bit down on the back of her neck, dragging her deeper into the enclosure. The lion began to treat her precisely as it would prey in the wild. He used his powerful forelimbs to pin her to the ground, shifting his grip to bite into her shoulder and upper back. Then with savage force he raked downward with his hind legs, tearing through clothing and flesh, in a defensive feeding behavior known as bunny kicking. Nero's jaws clamped around the base of her neck again, compressing her spine, as blood soaked into the dry earth. He bit into her upper thigh, tearing tissue from the muscle. In an attempt to reach the femoral artery, had lost consciousness within moments of the mauling. But Nero continued the assault, as if she were still struggling above the viewing platform. Erupted in pandemonium. Guests screamed, pulling their children back from the railing. Staff arrived with poles, fire extinguishers, and tranquilizer rifles. At 1:52 p.m., the first dart struck Nero's hindquarters, but the lion did not retreat. He dragged several feet before a second dart hit, slowing his movements. It took nearly 5 minutes for the sedatives to fully take effect, causing Nero to collapse near the rock ledge. Emergency responders arrived at 2:04 p.m., entering the enclosure. Once it was declared safe, paramedics assessed at the scene and found no signs of life. She was pronounced deceased at 2:11 p.m. The autopsy confirmed the extent of the trauma: a severed vertebral artery, multiple fractured ribs, a shattered pelvis, and deep lacerations across her torso and limbs. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination due to cervical trauma. Consistent with both the fall and the lion's attack, news of the incident rapidly spread throughout Brazil, sparking a nationwide outcry over safety deficiencies at Recanto Animal. Within days, state investigators launched a formal inquiry, uncovering a series of violations that raised serious concerns about the park's operations. These included unreinforced railings along elevated platforms, a lack of secondary containment around high-risk enclosures, insufficient signage, and an absence of trained emergency personnel. On-site surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts confirmed that the fall had occurred due to preventable structural shortcomings, and officials concluded that the facility had failed to provide adequate safeguards for visitors. While the incident was officially classified as an accident, the zoo was found to be negligent in maintaining basic safety standards. Recanto Animal was temporarily shut down, fined by local authorities, and ordered to complete a full overhaul of its safety protocols before reopening to the public. Nero, the lion involved in the attack, was placed under observation and was later transferred to a wildlife sanctuary in Rio Grande do Sul, where he would live out the rest of his life with no further contact with the public. Death sent shockwaves through the community. Her school memorial service, attended by hundreds of students, families, and colleagues. She was remembered not for the tragic way she died, but for her compassion, leadership, and unwavering commitment to children. Her story later became a case study cited in several safety reform initiatives targeting private zoological facilities across Brazil. It was a clear spring morning on May 29, 2017, when the quiet town of Huntingdonshire, England, was shaken by a tragedy that would make headlines worldwide. Hamerton Zoo Park, a modest but cherished wildlife sanctuary nestled in the English countryside, had opened its gates that day like any other for the staff, including a 33-year-old zookeeper. It was another routine day caring for the animals they loved. But within hours, the zoo would become the site of a devastating encounter between human and predator. Was known for her radiant enthusiasm and unwavering dedication to her work. From a young age, she had been captivated by animals, frequently visiting Hamerton Zoo with her family. Those early trips sparked a love for wildlife that would shape her future as a teenager. She spent hours studying zoology and volunteering at animal sanctuaries, determined to turn her passion into a career. By the time she joined the staff at Hamerton Zoo, was already well known to the team. Her colleagues described her as a shining light of the park, a vibrant, caring individual who had an almost magical bond with the creatures she cared for. Over the next 13 years, became a cornerstone of the zoo. She wasn't just a caretaker, but an innovator, spearheading projects to improve the animals' living spaces and safety systems. One of her most significant contributions was redesigning the enclosures for large carnivores like tigers and cheetahs. She introduced a gate system that allowed zookeepers safely clean and maintain the cages, While keeping the animals securely separated in adjoining spaces, her ingenuity earned her respect from peers, and was even adopted by other zoological parks. But as careful and meticulous as was even the most advanced safety systems rely on human vigilance, a fact that became heartbreakingly clear. That fateful day, the Malayan tiger enclosure was one of the zoo's main attractions. These sleek, powerful predators captivated visitors with their striped coats and piercing eyes. Among them was Sisip, a 200-pound male tiger, whose raw strength and primal instincts belied his life in captivity. Like all big cats, Sisip was a hunter by nature, and no amount of enclosure walls could erase the predatory edge hardwired into his being. That morning was performing her routine rounds before the zoo opened to the public. The tasks were familiar: cleaning water troughs, tidying enclosures, and wiping the glass panels so visitors would have an unobstructed view of the animals. Unbeknownst to her, one critical detail had been overlooked: the metal slide that separated Sisip from the area she was about to enter had not been properly secured. The gate, which should have locked automatically, remained slightly ajar. Sisip, curious but unhurried, had slipped back into the main enclosure. Unnoticed, entered the tiger's habitat armed with a bucket of soapy water sponges and a handheld broom. To her, this was just another day, another moment of care for the animals she adored. She bent down to scrub the glass panels. Her back turned to the tiger, who was now watching her from behind a low wall. At first, Sisip appeared merely curious, his body low to the ground, as he observed the unfamiliar figure inside his space. But curiosity soon gave way to something deeper. An instinctive urge to hunt. The tiger crept closer, his massive paws, making no sound against the ground, remained focused on her task, unaware of the danger that was now just feet away. Then a faint movement in her peripheral vision made her blood run cold. She turned her head just enough to catch the side of the open gate, and instinctively her feet began moving toward the exit. She knew better than anyone what that open door meant. Sensing her sudden movement, Sisip made his move in one powerful leap. Tiger closed the distance between them and landed on his back. The force of his weight drove her to the ground, and before she could scream, Sisip's jaws closed around her neck. His teeth tore through skin and muscle, cutting off her airway and silencing her cries. The pain was excruciating, and the pressure immense and unrelenting was crushing. Clawed at the ground, desperately trying to free herself. But Sisip held firm. He didn't shake or tear at her body. He didn't need to. His powerful jaws were perfectly placed, and he applied just enough force to keep her immobilized. With one final push of desperation, managed to shift her weight. For a moment, it seemed like she might break free, but the movement only enraged the tiger. He adjusted his grip, and with a brutal shake of his head, he severed spinal cord. Death came instantly, sparing her from further pain, though the scene that followed was no less horrifying. For the next hour, as staff and visitors unknowingly went about their day, Sisip lingered near his lifeless body. He wasn't driven by hunger, had been fed earlier that morning, but rather by a blend of curiosity and instinct. It wasn't until a visitor peering through the glass of the enclosure noticed a pool of blood and raised the alarm that anyone realized what had happened. Zoo staff acted swiftly, ushering visitors out of the area while coaxing Sisip back into his side. Enclosure emergency services arrived quickly, but it was clear that there was nothing they could do. For her body, unrecognizable from the ferocity of the attack, was recovered only after the scene was deemed safe. On March 6, 2013, the quiet of early morning settled over Cat Haven, a sanctuary sprawling across 100 acres of rolling California foothills. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows over the enclosures lined with tall grass and scattered rocks. Where big cats roamed, the air was cool and still, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call. A dedicated staff member moved along the winding paths in a golf buggy, her routine well-rehearsed, carrying supplies for feeding and cleaning each enclosure. The park owner, Dale Anderson, was away for the day, taking a cheetah to a local school as part of an outreach program. Left behind were the staff member and another colleague, Meg Pauls, tasked with caring for the sanctuaries. Many residents, their movements were the only sign of life amid the morning's calm. The day followed a familiar routine. Both staff members were assigned to separate sections of the park, handling the tasks independently and meeting up at the end of their route. This setup was standard, allowing them to work efficiently across the sanctuary's 100 acres. The staff member, confident and focused, continued on her path, handling each task with the precision and commitment she developed over her months at Cat Haven. But as the morning unfolded, the routine would take an unexpected and tragic turn later. That afternoon, the staff member approached Couscous's enclosure ready to clean. As part of her usual routine, she separated the lion into a smaller holding area, with a partition gate, a standard step in ensuring her safety. While she worked in the main enclosure, Couscous, familiar with this practice, moved calmly into the confined section. The 4-year-old lion raised at Cat Haven, since she was just 8 weeks old, had become a fixture at the sanctuary. But today, as the staff member focused on her tasks, something critical went unnoticed: the partition gate. Holding Couscous hadn't latched securely. While the staff member was sweeping the enclosure floor, Couscous noticed the unlatched gate. He nudged it with his powerful paw, testing the barrier, and it swung open. The 500-pound lion took a step forward, now just feet from the staff member, his powerful muscles rippling under his golden coat. As he silently approached, the staff member, still focused on her work, was completely unaware of the danger closing in behind her. In one swift moment, Couscous closed the distance and swiped at her with a single powerful paw, knocking her to the ground. The impact alone from a lion of his size and strength was fatal, breaking her neck. Instantly, the strike was delivered with the same force he might have used in the wild to take down prey like an antelope. With the staff member motionless on the ground, Couscous continued to circle her, curious and perhaps playfully nudging Hera, behavior that might be seen as routine interaction among his pride in the wild. But here in the enclosure, it was a haunting scene. Meg, stationed in another part of the park, called out to her colleague over the radio. When there was no response, she finished her tasks, expecting to meet up as usual. But as she waited, the staff member was nowhere to be seen. Concerned, Meg climbed into her golf buggy and drove toward the lion enclosure, where she spotted her colleague's own buggy parked nearby. A chill ran through her as she saw her lying on the ground near a bush, with Couscous standing close by, occasionally nudging her motionless form. Meg's heart raced. Her colleague looked like she had fainted, but Couscous was outside his usual pen. She approached carefully, speaking calmly to the lion, hoping to keep him at a distance. While quickly reaching for her radio to call for help, she called for emergency help, and within minutes, responders from the Fresno County Sheriff's Office arrived, strategizing a way to separate the lion from the body. Couscous, however, had grown defensive, blocking anyone who attempted to enter. Efforts to distract him with food failed as he lunged at officers approaching the enclosure. Ultimately, they made the difficult decision to shoot Couscous to ensure safe access to her colleague. December 30th, 2018, began like any other brisk winter day at the Conservators Center in Burlington, North Carolina. The sanctuary, home to over 80 exotic animals, was a quiet refuge for big cats like lions, tigers, and leopards, many of whom had been rescued from neglect and abuse. It was a place of education, conservation, and care, attracting visitors and animal enthusiasts alike. For a 22-year-old intern with a passion for wildlife, it was a stepping stone toward her dream career. But by midday, the peaceful environment of the sanctuary would be shattered by a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. A recent graduate of Indiana University, Bloomington, with a degree in animal behavior, had always been fascinated by the natural world. She dedicated her young life to learning about and caring for animals, spending her college years interning at wildlife sanctuaries and animal rescue centers across the country. Her time at the Conservators Center was her 4th internship, and though she had only been there for 10 days, her enthusiasm had already left an impression on the staff. Friends and colleagues described her as bright, hardworking, and deeply committed to making a difference in the world of animal care. That morning, joined the husbandry team for a routine cleaning of one of the lion enclosures. Among the center's residents was Maddie, a 14-year-old male lion who weighed over 500 pounds. Maddie had been rescued in 2004 from appalling conditions in Ohio, where he was kept in a cramped cage and malnourished. Though Maddie had been nervous and withdrawn when he first arrived at the sanctuary, years of compassionate care had earned the trust of his handlers. Still, like all big cats, Maddie's primal instincts remained intact, hidden beneath the surface of his otherwise calm demeanor. The cleaning process was one the team had performed countless times before. As part of the routine, the lions were moved into secure holding areas, separated from the sections being cleaned by a series of locked gates. On this day, however, a seemingly minor detail would set the stage for disaster: a large play ball left inside the enclosure rolled into the path of a gate. When the staff attempted to secure the lion behind the gate, the ball prevented it from closing completely unbeknownst to them. The latch remained unfastened and her colleagues worked on cleaning the enclosure. Maddie, curious about the open gate, nudged it with his snout. The gate swung open, and the massive lion stepped through, his padded paws silent against the concrete. His usual wariness was overtaken by instinct. The sight of just feet away triggered something primal. The lion, who had spent years in captivity, had never lost his predatory nature. What followed would happen in seconds. Maddie lunged at his jaws, closing around her ankle. The force of his weight pulled her to the ground. As she struggled against him, kicking and thrashing in an attempt to free herself, her colleagues sprang into action, shouting and trying to distract the lion. But Maddie's focus was unyielding. He dragged into the outer section of the enclosure, away from the staff, who could only watch in horror. Animal trainer Ashley Watts, who had been working alongside, grabbed a hose and sprayed water at Maddie in a desperate attempt to deter him. The jet of water hit the lion squarely in the face, soaking his eyes and snout. But he didn't flinch. His grip tightened, and he shifted his focus, sinking his massive canines into his neck. The pressure crushed her windpipe, cutting off her screams. Blood pooled on the concrete floor as Maddie dragged her further into the enclosure. Despite size and weight being no match for the lion, she fought back with everything she had. She punched and clawed at the animal, leaving defensive wounds on her arms. The autopsy would later reveal the extent of her bravery, evidence of a fierce struggle that continued until her strength gave out. But Maddie's overwhelming power prevailed. His jaw severed arteries, and his claws tore into her shoulders and back within minutes. She succumbed to her injuries. As the horrifying scene unfolded, the center staff called for emergency services. The Caswell County Sheriff's Office responded quickly, and deputies found Maddie pacing inside the enclosure, his muzzle bloodstained. The staff's efforts to lure him into a secure holding area with raw meat failed, leaving no option but to neutralize the threat. Armed officers fired several shotgun rounds at the lion, ultimately killing him. When the scene was finally secured, staff approached his lifeless body. The injuries she had sustained were catastrophic. Her spinal cord had been fractured, and her body bore deep puncture wounds from the lion's teeth and claws. Her death was pronounced on site. The incident prompted an immediate investigation by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to determine how such a tragedy could have occurred. Reports revealed that the Conservators Center had passed safety inspections as recently as April 2018, with no violations noted. Previous inspections had also deemed the facility compliant with safety standards. The center staff emphasized that the attack was the result of a freak accident, a one-in-a-million occurrence caused by the misplaced play ball. March 12, 2015, began as another frigid late winter day in Minsk, Belarus. The morning fog hung heavy over the Soviet-era zoo complex, its concrete walls still holding the previous night's chill. Families and school groups moved between exhibits, their breath visible in the cold air, while the distant sounds of various animals echoed across the grounds. None of the visitors could have predicted that in less than 12 hours their local zoo would become the scene of one of Eastern Europe's most horrific incidents. A 23-year-old man, standing 511, with an athletic build from years of amateur soccer, worked as a delivery driver for a local grocery chain. He lived with two roommates in a modest apartment near the city center. Known for his easy smile and quick jokes, was popular among his coworkers and had a reputation for being the life of any party. His mother, a school teacher, had raised him alone after his father left when he was young. Despite struggling financially, she had ensured he completed his education and found stable employment. Was not ambitious. He was content with his simple life, regular paycheck, and close circle of friends. His supervisor described him as reliable if somewhat immature, noting his tendency to joke around during shifts. That Thursday evening, after finishing his shift at 7 p.m., met his closest friends Ivan Popov and Dmitry Sokolov at the Golden Bear pub, just 2 blocks from the zoo. The three had known each other since high school and met regularly to drink and share stories about their week. As the evening wore on and the drinks flowed freely, their conversation grew louder and more boisterous. After several rounds of drinks, the conversation shifted to wild ideas and risky adventures. The zoo came up naturally. It was just a few blocks away, and all three men had grown up visiting it as kids, fueled by alcohol and a desire to do something reckless. Suggested they sneak in after hours, just to see if they could, rather than laugh it off. Ivan and Dmitri encouraged the idea. And within minutes the plan was set in motion. At 11:23 p.m. with the temperature at 28 degrees F, the three young men stumbled toward the zoo's perimeter. The security lighting cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and the evening fog provided cover as they searched for a way. In finding a maintenance ladder near the bare enclosure went first, clumsily scaling the 15-foot wall, while Ivan and Dmitri kept watch. What the three friends didn't realize was that they were about to encounter one of Europe's most formidable predators. The Eurasian brown bear stands as one of the continent's largest and most dangerous animals. Adult males can weigh up to 1,400 pounds, with the zoo's resident male Boris weighing in at 850 pounds. These bears possess immense strength, capable of flipping 1,500-pound rocks with ease, while foraging. Their massive paws are equipped with curved claws up to 5 inches long, perfect for digging and delivering devastating strikes. A brown bear's bite force reaches 975 pounds per square inch, allowing them to crush bones as thick as a human femur effortlessly. Despite their bulk, they can reach speeds of 35 mph over short distances and are excellent swimmers in Belarus's forests. These bears represent the apex of the food chain, commanding respect through their intelligence, strength, and adaptability. At 11:35 p.m., dropped down into the enclosure, landing with a soft thud on the frozen ground. The 6,000-square-foot habitat featured artificial rock formations, a deep pool, and several large oak trees. The evening fog had thickened, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. Ivan and Dmitri, still perched on the outer wall of the enclosure, filmed with their phones, as pulled out his own device and switched on its flashlight. Alcohol-impaired voice carried across the enclosure as he encouraged his friends to join him. His words were slurred, and he stumbled slightly as he walked deeper into the habitat. Ivan, never one to back down from a challenge, swung his legs over the wall and followed. Dmitri, more hesitant, remained on the wall, but recorded with his phone camera. The enclosure was eerily quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the gentle splashing of water from the filtration system. The beam from his phone light swept across the ground, illuminating scattered bones from Boris's recent meals, a detail that should have served as a warning. At 11:37 p.m. Boris emerged from his den. The 850-pound bear had been awakened by the intruders and moved with surprising stealth for an animal his size. Ivan spotted him first, his alcohol-dulled mind taking precious seconds to process the danger. Boris charged with explosive speed, covering the 30-foot distance between himself, and in less than 2 seconds, the sound of scream was cut short as the bear's massive form slammed into him, sending his phone flying into the darkness. The impact alone shattered 3 ribs and his left collarbone. Ivan scrambled back toward the wall in panic, falling and fracturing his ankle in the process. Dmitri, still perched on the wall, fumbled with his phone as he called emergency services, his trembling hands and intoxication making it difficult to dial. The operator initially thought it was a prank call, until she heard the horrific sounds in the background. Boris dragged toward the artificial rock formation, the bear's claws leaving deep gashes across his victim's torso. Each time attempted to crawl away, the bear would clamp down harder, his powerful jaws crushing bone and tissue. The attack continued for nearly 4 minutes, with Boris treating exactly as he would natural prey in the wild. Night security guard Mikey Vyulov, alerted by the commotion, arrived at the enclosure at 11:41 p.m. His flashlight beam caught the gruesome scene. Boris was now standing over his motionless form, the ground around them dark with blood. Despite the freezing temperature, Volkov immediately radioed for the zoo's emergency response team, but protocol prevented anyone from entering the enclosure. While the bear was still active, Ivan had managed to drag himself to the outer fence, where he lay sobbing and repeating his name. Dmitri remained frozen on the wall, his phone still recording, as emergency vehicle lights began to illuminate the area. The first police units arrived, followed by ambulances minutes later, their sirens causing Boris to become even more agitated. The zoo's chief veterinarian, Dr. Elena Petrova, arrived at 11:52 p.m. with tranquilizer equipment. But by then, it was clear that any intervention would come too late, for the bear had to be sedated before emergency personnel could safely enter the enclosure, a process that took an additional 15 minutes. At 12:07 a.m., after confirming Boris was fully sedated, emergency personnel entered the enclosure. The temperature had dropped to 25 degrees F, and their flashlights revealed a horrific scene. Body lay crumpled near the artificial rock formation, surrounded by bloodstained snow. First responders noted that the cold had already begun to freeze the blood around the body. Paramedics pronounced deceased at the scene at 12:13 a.m. The initial assessment revealed catastrophic injuries. A crushed skull, severed spine, and massive trauma to the chest cavity. His winter coat had been torn to shreds, and deep claw marks covered most of his body. The following morning's investigation revealed the full extent of the tragedy. The medical examiner's report documented 94 distinct wounds on his body. The massive trauma included multiple crushed vertebrae, 17 broken ribs, and severe damage to internal organs. Deep puncture wounds from the bear's 5-inch claws covered his torso, and his right arm had been completely severed during the attack. The massive blood loss had been expedited by the numerous arterial wounds inflicted by Boris's powerful bite. Ivan was treated at Minsk Central Hospital for a compound ankle fracture and severe shock. Dmitry, though physically unharmed, was admitted to the psychiatric ward for acute trauma. The incident sparked immediate changes. At Minsk, Zoo director Sergei Morozov announced a comprehensive security upgrade, including installation of motion sensors and additional cameras. The 15-foot perimeter walls, which had proved insufficient, were topped with electric fencing within a month. It was January 22, 2017 in Ningbo, China, where the humid air of winter brushed the streets of Yinzhou District. The Ningbo Wildlife Park, a small but well-known zoo nestled on the outskirts of the city, prepared for another day of visitors. As families arrived in droves, the low murmur of chatter filled the air, mixing with the sounds of children laughing and playing near the zoo's playground. The towering walls of the park loomed around its borders, keeping the public at a distance from the animals within. The zoo was home to over 200 species, some native to China, others imported from distant lands. For most visitors, it offered an opportunity to see wildlife up close. Though the conditions left much to be desired, the animals, many confined to small, overcrowded enclosures, were often taunted into performing tricks for the audience's entertainment. The filthy conditions and malnourishment of some animals were barely acknowledged by the visitors, and the harsh reality of life in captivity went unnoticed. But to those who spent enough time there, the zoo's grim atmosphere suggested that an accident might be inevitable. A man and his family had planned a simple Sunday afternoon outing, accompanied by their friends, the Lee family. As they approached the gates, both the man and Mr. Lee felt that the 130 yuan entry fee, roughly $18 USD, was far too steep for what the zoo had to offer, so they decided to find another way. And the man's wife, unaware of their scheme, continued toward the main entrance with Mrs. Lee and their children, oblivious to the plan that was about to unfold. The walls surrounding the zoo were high, at least 10 feet tall, but a tree near a section of the border caught the man's eye. It was close enough for him and Mr. Lee to scale. The men, seeking a cheap thrill and the satisfaction of getting something for nothing, decided to bypass the ticket booth. They grabbed the low-lying branches, hoisted themselves up, and climbed the rest of the way to the top of the perimeter wall. On the other side of the wall, the ground was just a short drop away. The man, eager to see the zoo without paying, crouched down and let himself dangle from the edge. After a moment's hesitation, he let go, landing with a dull thud on the hard ground below. Mr. Lee followed suit, both men celebrating their small victory, but a new challenge lay before them. Another wall, this time with sharp metal bars curving toward them like claws, stood in their path. Despite the clear warning signs posted on the wall, the man and Mr. Lee pushed forward, ignoring the signs and the risks involved. They searched for a way over. Mr. Lee, with one foot on the other's shoulder, helped the man climb higher, their fingers gripping the bars. The climb wasn't easy, but it was manageable. When they finally reached the top of the second wall, they gazed down below them. 3 tigers lay in wait. Unbeknownst to the two men, they had climbed into the territory of Ningbo Zoo's most dangerous residents. Mr. Lee, his heart pounding in his chest, quickly reconsidered. This was too risky. What had started as a bit of fun had quickly turned into a dangerous predicament. He began to climb down, deciding to retreat. But the man, now committed to the adventure, decided he wouldn't turn back. He was already there, and he wasn't about to leave without exploring the zoo further. Without a second thought, the man dropped down into the tiger enclosure. The tigers, alert to the intruder, stirred from their resting places. Their powerful bodies moved with precision as they slowly approached the new arrival. The man, having underestimated the animal's instinctive response, assumed they would be docile as he had seen tigers in zoos before usually disinterested or unbothered by the presence of visitors. But these were not docile creatures, these were wild animals conditioned by captivity, but still very much governed by their instincts. Moment the man's feet hit the ground, the tigers began their calculated approach, eyes fixed on the strange, vulnerable figure. Below, visitors who had entered the zoo through the front gate saw what was unfolding in real time. Panicked voices rang out as children screamed, and parents frantically tried to pull their families away from the viewing area. Within moments, one of the tigers lunged. It was sudden, the impact was violent. The tiger grabbed the man by the head, sinking its teeth deep into his skull. His scream was swallowed by the animal's powerful jaws. The man tried desperately to fight back, kicking and thrashing, but his body was weak compared to the raw strength of the tiger. His attempts grew more feeble as the tiger's grip tightened. On the wall above, Mr. Lee stood, frozen, his heart in his throat. He watched helplessly as his friend was mauled before his eyes. The situation was too dangerous for him to intervene. His mind raced. But no solution came. The tiger with brutal force tore at the man's body. Its fangs ripped through his jacket, exposing his flesh. Beneath, the other two tigers circled, keeping a watchful eye on the struggle, their hunger evident. The scene played out in front of horrified onlookers, who had no way of stopping the carnage. For over an hour, the tiger toyed with its victim. It dragged the man across the grass, biting into different parts of his body, before flipping him onto his back. Visitors watched in shock as the man's life slowly drained away. The tiger never let go. It was a predatory dance, a calculated show of power. The zoo staff had been alerted, and armed police soon arrived on the scene. At first, firecrackers were detonated, but the noise had little effect on the tiger. Desperate zookeepers aimed a powerful hose the animal, but it barely flinched. The tiger continued to drag the man's body, oblivious to the distractions. The situation escalated quickly, with the tiger still locked onto the man's lifeless body. Armed police took action under the direction of zoo staff. They fired on the animal, bringing it down. The tiger, once a symbol of raw, untamed power, lay still. The other two tigers were secured and confined to their indoor pens. But the damage had been done. The man, though unconscious, was still alive when emergency responders rushed into the enclosure to retrieve him. He was quickly transported to the hospital, but the wounds were too severe. Hours later, he was pronounced dead. What began as a simple family outing had turned into a devastating tragedy. A wife had lost her husband, children their father, and a tiger had lost its life as a consequence of human recklessness. It was a clear summer morning on August 4, 2017, at Orsarövdjurspark, Scandinavia's largest predator park, tucked away in the serene wilderness of Sweden, known for its spacious enclosures and an impressive collection of predators like brown bears, wolves, and lynxes. The park offered visitors a rare glimpse into the lives of these majestic creatures. The sprawling reserve prided itself on its reputation for safety, boasting well-maintained enclosures and strict protocols for its staff. However, that reputation would be irreversibly tarnished after a tragic event that would claim the life of a young zookeeper. Among the park's dedicated employees was a 19-year-old who had recently joined the team fresh out of school, was eager to pursue his passion for wildlife. His ultimate dream was to work as a zoologist or veterinarian, and this job was his first step toward that goal. Was known among his colleagues for his enthusiasm, hardworking nature, and genuine affection for the animals under his care. Despite being new to the role, he was trusted with routine tasks and had quickly become a valued member of the team. That morning had been assigned the task of cleaning the brown bear enclosure. While it wasn't the most glamorous job, approached it with his usual diligence. The park's brown bear enclosure was one of its most prominent attractions, housing the powerful predators in a large wooded habitat designed to mimic their natural environment to ensure safety. During cleaning, the bears were routinely lured into a smaller holding pen attached to the main enclosure. This procedure allowed staff to work without fear of coming into direct contact with the animals. The system had worked without incident for years, and all protocols were followed. That day, as entered the enclosure, the bears had already been locked in the holding area, where they were distracted with food. Unbeknownst to anyone, however, one of the bears had been digging near the edge of its holding pen. Over time, the animal had created a tunnel under the fence, just large enough for it to squeeze through. The digging had gone unnoticed during routine checks, and no one suspected that the fence, which extended a few feet underground, could be compromised. Worked methodically, shoveling debris and tidying up the space. The enclosure was in disarray after days of the bear's restless passing their nervous energy, a sign of the approaching autumn scattered scat, overturned water troughs, and clawed up dirt, marked the area evidence of the bear's natural behaviors focused on his task, was unaware of the danger lurking. Just beyond his line of sight the bear, having successfully escaped its holding pen, prowled main enclosure for several moments. It moved silently watching, as he worked. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear charged at its immense body, surging forward in a blur of fur and muscle. In an instant it closed the gap, slamming into him with a force that sent him sprawling to the ground. Its claws tore into his arms, as he instinctively raised them, ripping through fabric and skin. As it bore down on him, the bear's jaws locked onto his shoulder, crunching through bone with terrifying ease, and it shook him like ragdoll, sending blood spraying across the enclosure. The staff, alerted by piercing screams, raced toward the chaos, grabbing shovels, poles, and anything within reach. They charged the bear, yelling and swinging in a desperate attempt to force it back. The animal snarled, its massive frame undeterred by the frantic assault, its every movement exuding raw, uncontainable power. The staff's makeshift weapons were no match for the predator, which held its ground, its focus unbroken, unable to subdue the bear by other means. A rifle was retrieved with grim precision. The staff took aim. The crack of the gunfire echoed through the park. As the bear was struck, collapsing with a final growl, the enclosure fell silent, save gasps of the staff as they rushed to his crumpled form. When the staff finally reached, the extent of his injuries was horrifying. His shoulder was mangled, his chest and back bore deep claw marks, and his head had struck the ground during the attack, causing significant trauma. Though barely alive, was still breathing. The staff acted quickly, carrying him out of the enclosure and rushing him to the nearest medical facility. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize his injuries, were extensive with severe trauma to his head and upper body. Despite their best efforts, his condition deteriorated over the next 2 agonizing days. He remained in a coma, showing no signs of improvement. The damage to his brain was irreversible, and his vital signs continued to weaken. On August 6th, surrounded by his grieving family, passed away. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Oversights and beyond. Investigations confirmed that all safety protocols had been followed, and no negligence was found on the part of the staff. Bear's escape was attributed to its ability to dig under the fence, a vulnerability that hadn't been adequately accounted for in the enclosure's design. In response, the park implemented significant changes to its infrastructure, reinforcing enclosures with concrete barriers that extended deeper underground. The incident also prompted other parks across the region to review their safety measures, ensuring that similar tragedies could be avoided. It was April 20, 2007, in Beihai City, located in South China's Guangxi Autonomous Region. The famous holiday resort Yintan, also known as Silver Beach, was a place of allure, drawing visitors from all corners of the country. This resort, with its gleaming sands and serene waters, was typically a retreat for families seeking leisure. The beach, known as the finest in China, stretched for miles under the golden sun, its quartz sand shimmering like silver beneath the sunlight. Tourists engaged in water sports, swimming and picnicking along the coast, all the while oblivious to the more perilous side of the resort. At the edge of the beach stood the holiday resort, which housed a variety of entertainment, including a notorious crocodile show. The crocodiles were kept in a small, inconspicuous enclosure, where they performed for visitors. The spectacle included throwing dead meat into the water, or holding it high for the crocodiles to leap, sometimes as high as 5 feet, into the air. Visitors marveled at the reptile's power and agility. But the enclosure wasn't just a place for entertainment to the children of the nearby primary schools. The crocodile enclosure had become a place of daredevil challenges. Every few days, groups of boys would sneak into the area, after school hours, climbing over the low wall surrounding the pool, and daring each other to get as close as possible to the crocodiles. Armed with sticks and rocks, they would rush into the enclosure and smack the crocodiles on their heads before fleeing back to safety. It was a cruel game, one that seemed harmless to the children, but one which held terrible consequences for those who were brave enough to participate. That evening at around 6 p.m., a group of 4 9-year-old boys from CNN Primary School, among them a young boy named, decided to take part in the infamous crocodile challenge with wooden stick slingshots and a handful of pebbles. The group walked to the resort. The resort was closed for the day, and the grounds were eerily quiet. The gates weren't locked, offering an easy entry for the children, who moved swiftly, staying as quiet as possible. The wall surrounding Crocodile Pool stood at only a meter in height in some places, and in others it was as low as 55 cm. 22 inches tall, it was not designed to keep people out, and it was certainly no match for a determined group of children. There had even been an incident a few years prior, when several of the crocodiles managed to escape through a drainage pipe that led to the beach. A panic ensued when sunbathers and swimmers were suddenly confronted by the reptiles, but fortunately no one was harmed. Before the crocodiles were recaptured, Az and his friends climbed the low wall and dropped into the enclosure. They ignored the large warning signs that were clearly displayed urging visitors to stay away from the crocodiles. But the thrill of the challenge outweighed any caution for the boys. They dropped into the pool area, and the crocodiles, many of them basking on the sides of the pool, looked up curiously at the newcomers. The children quickly began loading their slingshots with rocks, shooting them at the reptiles. The rocks, with a thud, and some of the crocodiles hissed and slid into the water. To escape the true test of bravery came next. One of the boys, in an act of defiance, ran up to a crocodile, and with a stick in hand, slammed it down on the creature's head before sprinting away. With excitement, the other boys watched, eagerly waiting for their turn. When it was turn, he took up the stick and walked toward the same crocodile. The animal, having already been provoked, was on edge as swung the stick down on its head. The crocodile, in an instant, lunged forward. Its jaw snapped with terrifying precision, and in a flash was dragged into the water by his shirt. His terrified screams through the empty resort, but they were drowned out by the roar of the water. The other boys rushed to the pool's edge, one of them reaching out to grab's hand. But it was too late. Was pulled under the water as the crocodile readjusted its grip and tightened its deadly jaws on his torso. The boys could see his eyes bulging in fear as he momentarily surfaced. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The terror was evident in his eyes, but there was nothing they could do. The other 10 crocodiles, sensing the commotion and the smell of fresh blood, slid into the water and began to feast on the helpless boy. Friends could only watch in helpless horror as their friend was torn apart by the beasts. A dark cloud of blood swirled in the murky water. The once quiet pool, now a scene of carnage. The children, their hearts racing with fear, scrambled to escape. They leapt over the wall, racing for help. Their desperate cries were heard by Lu Jian, the crocodile keeper hired by the park. After the previous escape incident, Lu Jian had the responsibility of managing the crocodiles. However, that evening, the pool had been closed for the day, and the keeper was inside cooking a meal. He hadn't noticed the children sneaking into the enclosure. Upon hearing the children's screams, Lu Jian rushed to the crocodile pool. What he saw was beyond anything he could have imagined. The water was turbulent, and the crocodiles were still in the midst of their feeding. Frenzy's body was partially submerged in the water, his lifeless form being tugged in different directions by the monstrous reptiles. The sight was harrowing. When the police arrived, they quickly called in special armed units. A group of snipers was dispatched to deal with the crocodiles armed with raw pork. The snipers lured the crocodiles out of the water, where they were distracted by the food. As the crocodiles emerged, the snipers took aim at the one believed to have killed. 7 bullets struck the enormous creature, a 26-meter, 8.5-foot long, 330-pound predator. The crocodile was dragged out of the pool and transported to a trailer for dissection. Inside its stomach, they found the remains of Spotty. Though the other crocodiles had participated in the attack, it was this particular reptile that had caused most of the damage. Following the attack, the pool was drained, and the remaining crocodiles were removed. The animals were relocated to the Jiangxi Endangered Wild Animal Protection Center in Nanning, a facility that had the proper permits and infrastructure to house such dangerous creatures. The 3 children who had witnessed the brutal attack were left in a state of shock. They were unable to fully comprehend what had occurred, their minds struggling to process the horror. They were incoherent when questioned by the police, their eyes filled with terror. At night they woke screaming from nightmares, their minds trapped in the trauma of the event. A doctor from Beihai People's Hospital confirmed that the children were receiving psychological treatment, and he urged the school staff to avoid discussing the incident in front of them while they tried to cope with the aftermath in the courts. The responsibility for death fell on the park and the crocodile keeper. It was determined that the crocodile enclosure had not been properly secured, and that the park had operated without the necessary licenses to keep the animals. The courts awarded family compensation of 220,000 yuan, the equivalent of about $3,600, but no amount of money could bring back their son. November 4, 2012, began as a beautiful autumn day in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The crisp air carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the city's vibrant fall colors made it an ideal day for an outing. Families streamed into the Pittsburgh Zoo, and PPG Aquarium, a beloved destination that promised an up-close look at some of the world's most fascinating animals. Among the visitors that day were the Durkosh family. Jason Elizabeth and their 2-year-old son was a bright and curious toddler who captured hearts with his big smile and boundless energy. Despite his young age, he was already developing a strong personality full of curiosity and a love for adventure's fascination with animals made the zoo one of his favorite places. And this visit was a special treat for him. His parents, Jason and Elizabeth, were dedicated to nurturing their son's interests, often planning family outings that allowed to explore and learn. For the day was filled with wonder. He marveled at the towering giraffes, laughed at the playful antics of the penguins, and eagerly pointed at the prowling lions. His small hands clutched the railing at each exhibit, his excitement contagious as he chattered away to his parents about the animals he saw. As the family made their way through the zoo, they approached the African painted dog exhibit, a popular attraction, featuring one of nature's most efficient predators. With their striking coats of black, white, and tan, these animals captivated onlookers with their beauty and energy. But behind their elegant appearance lies a reputation as one of nature's most efficient predators. African painted dogs, also known as African wild dogs, are built for speed, endurance, and precision. They are exceptional hunters operating in tightly coordinated packs, with an astonishing kill rate of nearly 80%, far higher than that of lions. Their powerful jaws and sharp teeth are designed to tear through flesh and bone, and their teamwork allows them to take down prey much larger than themselves, though generally not aggressive toward humans in the wild. Their instincts are primal and relentless, making them inherently dangerous. If barriers are breached, these traits, honed by evolution, made them formidable inhabitants of the zoo's exhibit. The African painted dog exhibit consisted of a wooden observation deck with a waist railing and a netting system designed to catch debris, allowing visitors to view the animals from above. Elizabeth wanted to give the best view possible. Like many parents, she lifted her son onto the wooden railing so he could see over the barrier and watch the painted dogs move below. Was thrilled, pointing at the animals and bouncing slightly in her grip. The moment was meant be one of joy, a snapshot of a happy family day. But in an instant, everything changed. Leaned forward, eager to get a closer look, and slipped from Elizabeth's grasp. Horrified, she reached out to grab him, but he was already falling. The toddler tumbled approximately 14 feet into the enclosure, while a safety net below the railing was designed to catch falling objects. It was not built to withstand the weight of a child. Fell through the netting and landed on the ground inside the painted dog habitat. The response was swift and terrifying. As landed in their territory, the African painted dogs, startled by the sudden intrusion, immediately turned their attention to him. At first, they moved cautiously, circling and sniffing, their lean, powerful bodies tense with curiosity. But in mere moments, the atmosphere shifted. The pack's instincts, honed over thousands of years as one of nature's most effective predators, took over. What began as hesitation quickly turned into a coordinated attack. The dogs surrounded, their movements fluid and deliberate. Then the first one lunged, the rest followed, their sharp teeth and powerful jaws tearing into the small boy with devastating speed and precision. Witnesses later described the horrifying scene. Helpless on the ground, was bitten and dragged by the animals. Their actions, relentless and merciless. Desperate screams rang out from bystanders, and mother Elizabeth, who watched in sheer horror from the railing above. Zoo staff arrived quickly, deploying a fire extinguisher in a frantic effort to scare the pack away. But the dogs, driven by their instincts, ignored the noise and commotion. A police officer on site shot one of the dogs that refused to back down, but even that did little to deter the pack. The injuries suffered were catastrophic. The painted dogs bit into his head, neck, and torso, their powerful jaws inflicting deep, fatal wounds. Despite the efforts of staff and first responders, the attack unfolded too quickly for anyone to intervene in time. Within minutes, it was over. The scene was devastating. First responders and zoo staff worked together to recover, but the attack left bystanders and staff in shock. The Allegheny County medical examiner later confirmed that the cause of death was blood loss from multiple injuries sustained during the attack, not the fall itself. The zoo, which had operated for 116 years without a single visitor fatality, was forever changed in the weeks and months that followed. Questions arose about how such an incident could occur. Critics pointed to the design of the exhibit, arguing that the railing and netting system did not provide adequate safety measures to prevent a child from falling into the enclosure. The zoo defended its protocols, stating that signage clearly warned visitors not to lift children onto the railing. However, many felt that more robust safeguards should have been in place. It was a crisp September day in 1999, and the bustling Velikanen Zoo in Norilsk was alive with families eager to see its exotic residents. Among the visitors was Natalia, a young mother bringing her children to the zoo. For the first time, her oldest daughter, 8-year-old, had been looking forward to the trip for weeks, for the idea of seeing bears, tigers, and giraffes up close was the most exciting adventure she could imagine. But what began as a day of laughter and awe quickly turned into a mother's worst nightmare. Was a bright and curious child with a love for animals and a flair for creativity. She spent hours drawing pictures of lions, elephants, and other creatures she'd only seen in books, dreaming of them. She might see them in person. Her room was filled with crayon sketches of her favorite animals, proudly taped to the walls. A budding artist with a vivid imagination often told her mother she wanted to become a zookeeper or wildlife photographer. When she grew up, a trip to the Velikanen Zoo was meant to be a belated celebration of her recent birthday, an opportunity for her to experience the animals she adored so much up close. For weeks, she had eagerly counted down the days, planning to take her sketchbook along to capture her favorite moments. The Velikanen Zoo was a popular destination, but notorious for its poorly designed enclosures and lack of safety measures. Most of the large carnivores, including bears, were housed in open pits with low concrete walls. Visitors stood on raised platforms just 10 feet above the animals, separated by wide metal railings that offered little protection. Children often leaned through the bars for a better view. In action, the zoo's sparse security staff struggled to monitor the reliance on faith that well-fed animals wouldn't attack, left visitors dangerously exposed to flaw that would have devastating consequences. Natalia guided her children through the zoo, marveling at the variety of animals, beamed with excitement as they visited the giraffes and ostriches. She laughed as her younger twin brothers Alexei and Ivan chased geese in the petting zoo, only to cry when the birds turned aggressive. By the time they reached the bear enclosure, the twins were getting cranky, but was entranced by the sight of playful bear cubs wrestling below. The bear enclosure housed several black bears, their dark coats blending into the shadowy corners of the pit. 2 playful cubs tumbled near the center, their small forms contrasting sharply with the imposing bulk of the larger adults prowling the edges. Still had a handful of food pellets left from feeding the giraffes earlier. She moved closer to the railing, drawn by the cubs' playful antics. Leaning over slightly, she tossed the pellets into the enclosure, watching as the cubs eagerly sniffed the ground and gobbled up the treats. Their excitement brought a smile to her face as she remained focused on the bears below. Just a few feet away, a boy leaned dangerously far through the bars, shouting at the bears and tossing small rocks. His taunts were met with agitated pacing from one of the adult bears, which began moving restlessly near the wall of the enclosure. Its sharp claws scraped against the concrete, its movements growing more erratic. A security guard intervened, scolding the boy and dragging him away. But as he was pulled back, the boy shouted one loud jerk, the noise echoing sharply across the pit. Startled by the sudden sound, instinctively leaned forward to see what had happened, unaware of the danger now locked onto her. The startled bear reacted instantly. With a powerful leap, it scaled part of the wall, its massive paw swiping toward the commotion. The blow struck its claw, slashing across her face and neck. Screaming, she lost her balance and toppled into the enclosure, landing with a sickening thud on the concrete floor below. Disoriented and bleeding, struggled to stand, unaware of the danger closing in. The adult bear, enraged by the earlier disturbance, charged toward her. Before she could move, it slammed her to the ground, its jaws locking around her head. The sheer force of the attack broke her neck, killing her instantly. Another bear joined in, tearing at her lifeless body. As the crowd above screamed in horror, Natalia, hearing the commotion, rushed toward the enclosure with her twins in tow. Pushing through the panicked crowd, she arrived just as zookeepers fired on the attacking bear. The initial shots seemed to have little effect, the massive animal refusing to release its grip on its remains. Only after several more rounds did the bear finally collapse, its jaws still locked onto her lifeless body. Staff had to prise remains from the bear's powerful grip. As Natalia fell to her knees, screaming in anguish at the sight of the bloodied scraps of the purple jacket had proudly worn that morning, The attack horrified the other visitors, plunging the area into chaos. Panicked visitors fled in hysteria, some screaming for help, while others frantically shielded their children from the terrifying scene. A few bystanders, desperate to intervene, attempted to climb over the railings to reach, only to be restrained by security guards. Zookeepers worked frantically to regain control, their shouts drowned out by the commotion. The second bear, agitated by the chaos, was shot moments later, its lifeless body collapsing near the blood-soaked pit. April 9, 2013, was a warm and humid evening in below horizont, Brazil. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, its golden light cast long shadows over the Horizont Zoo, one of the largest zoological parks in the country. The day had been uneventful, with families and school groups visiting the exhibits before making their way to the exits. By 6 p.m., closing announcements echoed over the intercom, urging guests to leave. Among the visitors that day was a 32-year-old community volunteer and former athlete. He had arrived at the zoo alone, purchasing his ticket at 3:20 p.m. Security footage later showed him moving from one enclosure to another, pausing occasionally to observe the animals. Unlike most guests, he didn't take photos or linger at the popular exhibits. As the zoo emptied and the gates locked at 7 p.m., was nowhere to be seen. Was well-known and well-liked in his neighborhood of Pampulha, a district near the zoo. A former semi-professional football player, he had once been a promising athlete, playing as a midfielder for a local club. However, a knee injury at age 26 had ended his career prematurely. The transition had been difficult, but rather than drift aimlessly, had poured himself into his community for the past 5 years. He had worked at a youth center, coaching underprivileged kids in football. He helped organize tournaments, secure funding for equipment, and mentor young athletes who, like him, had dreams of making it the professional leagues. His passion wasn't just the sport. It was the kids who looked up to him. Outside of coaching, he was an active member of local charity projects. He helped with food drives, volunteered at a homeless shelter, and even assisted in an animal rescue group. By all accounts, he was a man who gave more than he took, which made what happened that night all the more shocking. Among the many animals had passed that afternoon, none were more dangerous than the one he would later encounter. The jaguar, Panthera onca, is South America's apex predator and one of the most powerful big cats in the world. Unlike lions and tigers, which suffocate their prey, jaguars use bone-crushing bites, their canines puncturing directly through skulls. Their bite force of over 1,500 psi makes them capable of breaking through turtle shells, thick bones, and even reinforced cages. Jaguars are also silent hunters, known for stalking prey before attacking with sudden explosive force. In the wild, they hunt capybaras, caimans, and even cattle in captivity. Their instincts remain intact, making them one of the most unpredictable predators in zoos. At Below Horizont Zoo, the most famous jaguar was Django, a 6-year-old male, weighing over 240 pounds. His enclosure was built to mimic the dense forest of his natural habitat, featuring thick foliage, rocky terrain, and a water feature. What led to scale its walls remains a mystery. At 8:10 p.m., an hour after the zoo had closed, emerged from a concealed spot near the big cat enclosures. His clothing was covered in dirt, suggesting he had been lying low for some time. Security footage later revealed that he had hidden inside a restroom near the reptile house, avoiding detection. As the last visitors left, making his way to the jaguar habitat, he stood near the outer fence for several minutes, seemingly assessing the enclosure. No one knows what he was thinking. The jaguar enclosure was surrounded by 2 barriers: a 10-foot chain-link fence with barbed wire, and a 15-foot concrete wall behind it. Scaling them was no easy feat. At 8:27 p.m., he began climbing using the metal framework of the fence. He pulled himself up, maneuvering carefully to avoid the barbed wire. The climb took nearly 4 minutes, after which he dropped down between the 2 barriers. At 8:35 p.m., he scaled the concrete wall using footholds in the rough surface to hoist himself up. He reached the top at 8:39 p.m. and sat there motionless, his figure barely visible against the dimly lit habitat. Then at 8:42 p.m., he lowered himself into the enclosure. The soft dirt shifted as landed inside the habitat. He took a step forward, his posture relaxed for a few seconds. Nothing happened then. From the far side of the enclosure, Django moved. Jaguars are masters of stealth, and Django had been watching from the darkness. As stepped closer, the jaguar reacted in 3 seconds. Django closed the distance, launching himself from the shadows with terrifying speed. Barely had time to turn before the jaguar slammed into him, knocking him Off his feet, as he hit the ground, Django's claws clamped onto his skull. Jaguars don't waste time with suffocation. Their instinct is to kill instantly. Django bit down harder, and a sickening crack echoed through the enclosure. Body went limp, but the attack wasn't over. Still locked onto his skull, Django dragged him deeper into the enclosure, disappearing into the dense foliage. At 9:20 p.m. during a routine patrol, security guard Louis Antunes noticed movement in the Jaguar enclosure. At first he assumed Django was just active for the night. Then he saw the blood. Louis's flashlight beam landed on a horrifying scene. A mangled body, partially hidden in the undergrowth. Django stood over it, his muzzle dripping with fresh blood. At the sight of the scene, Louis immediately reached for his radio and reported the emergency. Within minutes, additional zoo staff arrived at the Jaguar enclosure carrying tranquilizer rifles and equipment to separate the animal from the body. Django remained near remains, his posture low, muscles tense. When keepers attempted to distract him with food, he didn't respond. One of the staff fired tranquilizer darts, striking him in the hindquarters. The Jaguar reacted with a brief snarl, ears pinned back, but did not immediately move. Within minutes, the sedative took effect, and Django sluggishly retreated into the dense foliage at the back of the enclosure. Once the animal was no longer an immediate threat, zoo staff unlocked a service gate at the rear of the enclosure, allowing emergency personnel inside. Two paramedics, along with a police officer, entered first, carrying medical equipment there. Flashlights illuminated the ground, revealing disturbed earth-torn clothing and bloodstains in the sand. Body lay motionless, partially concealed by undergrowth. His injuries were severe, his skull visibly fractured and his limbs unnaturally positioned. There was no movement. At 9:35 p.m. paramedics conducted a brief examination before covering the body with a white sheet. Two additional responders entered with a stretcher, and together they carefully lifted his remains and carried him through the enclosure's rear gate to an awaiting ambulance. Its red and blue lights flashed against the concrete walls of the enclosure as law enforcement arrived to secure the scene's autopsy confirmed that his skull had been crushed with severe trauma to the brain. His body bore deep bite wounds and claw lacerations, but the fatal injury had been the first bite. His death shocked the community. The kids he coached at the youth center were devastated, struggling to understand why their mentor, who had always taught them about discipline and safety, had done something so reckless. His family refused to believe it was intentional. His brother insisted was not the kind of person to take such risks, but no one could explain why he had gone into that enclosure. Meanwhile, below horizon, zoo faced scrutiny, but officials maintained that security protocols had been followed as the barriers met safety standards, and there was no containment failure. Django remained at the zoo as he had acted on instinct and posed no ongoing threat. After a mandatory observation period, during which zookeepers monitored his behavior, he was returned to his normal routine. While some questioned whether he should remain on display, the incident was ultimately deemed the result of human trespassing rather than a lapse in zoo security. As time passed, public attention shifted, and life at the zoo resumed as usual. Death, however, left more questions than answers. His family and colleagues struggled to understand why he had taken such a risk. Was it an accident, a dare, a moment of recklessness? No one would ever know, but one fact remained. A single decision had cost him everything. It was a typical winter morning on February 24, 2007. At the Denver Zoo, the air was crisp, and the bustling zoo had not yet opened its gates to the public. Inside, the staff was busy preparing the exhibits for the day ahead. For a 27-year-old zookeeper, this was another day doing what she loved. Had been with the zoo since 2005, working closely with a variety of animals, including big cats, polar bears, and sea lions. Her dedication to wildlife and conservation had been evident long before she joined the Denver Zoo, where she quickly became a valued member of the team. But on this seemingly ordinary morning, an oversight in the safety protocols would set in motion a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. Passion for animals began early in her life, leading her to pursue a degree in biology at New Mexico State University. After graduating in 2002, she gained experience working at Colorado's Ocean Journey in Denver, an aquarium that also housed exotic animals such as Sumatran tigers and sea otters. By the time she joined the Denver Zoo, she was an experienced and capable zookeeper with a bright future ahead. That morning was tasked with duties in the feline exhibit area, among the zoo's impressive collection of big cats, was Jorge, a 6-year-old male jaguar, who weighed approximately 140 pounds. Jorge had been born at the Santa Cruz Municipal Zoo of South American fauna in Bolivia and was transferred to the Denver Zoo in 2005. Though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Jaguars, known for their immense strength and agility, possess one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom. Entered the feline building early that morning to begin her routine. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, but what is known is that established safety protocols were not followed. At some point, the door separating from Jorge's enclosure was opened. While the jaguar was still inside, this lapse would become the setup for a tragedy. As went about her tasks, Jorge began to move his shining muscular body, glided silently through the enclosure as he approached the open door. Jaguars are solitary hunters in the wild, known for their ability to stalk prey with unmatched stealth. Even in captivity, Jorge's instincts were sharp. He nudged the door open further with his powerful muzzle. Stepping into the corridor, where was working, turned at the sound of the metal hinges creaking. She froze as she locked eyes with Jorge, now just feet away. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. There was nothing between her and the predator, no bars, no fencing, no barriers of any kind. Though born in captivity, Jorge's primal instincts were intact. He was no longer a calm animal behind a cage, but a predator with a target in his sights. Paused, moving slowly to avoid sudden movements that could trigger an attack. She reached for her radio to call for help. But before she could act, Jorge lunged in one powerful leap. The jaguar closed the distance, his massive paws landing on with crushing force. She fell to the concrete floor, pinned beneath the weight of the 140-pound cat. His jaws clamped down on the back of her neck with devastating precision, severing her vertebrae and cutting off any chance to scream for help. The attack was quick and brutal. Jorge grappled with his claws, tearing into her shoulders and back. As he maintained his grip on her neck, despite the immense pain and overwhelming odds, fought back with all her strength. She clawed and punched at the jaguar, leaving defensive wounds on her arms and hands. Her colleagues would later recall that she had undergone extensive training in handling animals like Jorge. But nothing could have prepared her for this moment. A witness, noticing the commotion, saw legs protruding from beneath the jaguar and immediately raised the alarm. The zoo's emergency response team, trained to handle dangerous animal situations, was on the scene within minutes. 4 staff members arrived with fire extinguishers and tranquilizer equipment, prepared to do whatever it took to save their colleague. The team sprayed a fire extinguisher at Jorge, startling him momentarily and causing him to retreat. But as they rushed to tend to the jaguar, returned his instincts, driving him to defend his perceived territory. With no other option, the staff made the heartbreaking decision to use lethal force. Jorge was shot, and the jaguar let out a piercing cry before collapsing in another section of the enclosure. Despite their efforts, died from her injury. Shortly afterward, the trauma to her neck and internal injuries had been too severe. The Denver Zoo closed immediately following the incident, and the feline exhibit remained off-limits as authorities began an investigation to assess the zoo's safety protocols and determine the circumstances that led to the tragedy. Initial findings indicated that the enclosure's doors and locks were functioning correctly, and that no mechanical failures had occurred. Instead, the incident was attributed to human error, had failed to ensure that Jorge was securely locked away before entering the corridor. It was a warm evening in May 1987, and the sun had just set over Brooklyn as the city bustled with its usual energy. The Prospect Park Zoo grew quiet. Visitors had cleared out, the gates were locked, and the zoo security staff began their nightly patrols. But outside the perimeter, 3 boys were planning an adventure that would shatter the quiet and leave a dark scar on the zoo's history. An 11-year-old boy from Brooklyn was the leader of the group. A daring and energetic child had a knack for convincing his friends to join him in his risky ideas. That night, the boys had set out on a dare to sneak into the zoo and swim in the seal enclosure. It was a challenge born from mischief and youthful excitement, but one that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The Prospect Park Zoo, established in the 1930s, had long been criticized for its outdated enclosures. Many of the animals were housed in pit-like exhibits, with little to no environmental enrichment. The polar bear enclosure, home to 2 massive bears named Teddy and Lucy, was no exception. Surrounded by a moat and enclosed by wrought iron fences, the exhibit was meant to keep the bears in, but not necessarily to keep intruders out. As the boys circled the zoo's perimeter, they found a gap in the fencing just large enough to squeeze through. They crawled under the wire and crept into the quiet zoo, their giggles stifled by the thrill of sneaking around. Their original plan was to head to the seal exhibit, but the sight of the polar bear enclosure drew their attention. To the boys, it was the ultimate challenge. Swimming in the polar bear moat would make for a story no one else could tell. Eager to prove his bravery, was the first to climb the tall iron fence surrounding the polar bear exhibit. He tossed their clothes over the bars, declaring there was no turning back now. As he teetered onto the top, his friends hesitated, watching nervously from the ground. Ultimately, neither followed him into the enclosure, leaving to climb down alone. Landing on the concrete floor, he stood for a moment, taking in his surroundings before his friends urged him on toward the moat. The enclosure was quiet at first, the polar bears nowhere to be seen, but as waded into the cold moat, the commotion roused the enclosure's residents. Teddy, 1,200-pound male polar bear, and Lucy, a 900-pound female, stirred from their den. Lifting their heads, they sniffed the air, detecting the unfamiliar scent of the intruder. As climbed out of the water on the far side of the moat, Teddy emerged from the shadows. The massive bear began to move, its lumbering gait deceptively slow, but purposeful. Froze as the bear approached, its head swinging side to side, its powerful paws pressing into the ground. Before he could react, Teddy lunged, the bear's massive jaws clamped onto, shaking him violently. As his friends screamed in terror, the zoo was closed for the evening and no staff were present to witness the attack. After the two boys fled the scene in terror, they ran home and told their parents what had happened. The parents immediately contacted the police, who arrived at the zoo with emergency responders. By the time the officers arrived at the scene, the bears were fighting over remains near the entrance to their den, fearing that other children might also be in the enclosure. The officers made the difficult decision to shoot the bears. It took over 20 shots, including blasts from shotguns and revolvers, to bring down the two massive animals. Once the bears were subdued, officers and zoo staff searched the enclosure, but found no other victims. The incident sparked outrage and protests over the killing of the bears. Critics pointed to the zoo's outdated design and lack of security as contributing factors. The tragedy also brought long overdue attention to the poor conditions in which the animals were kept. In the years that followed, the Prospect Park Zoo was closed for renovations. By 1993, it reopened as the Prospect Park Wildlife Conservation Center, featuring modern enclosures and a new focus on education and conservation. The tragedy at Prospect Park Zoo became a defining moment in rethinking the purpose of zoos worldwide. What had once been spaces focused solely on entertainment began to shift toward conservation, education, and ethical animal care. Many institutions felt the push to redesign enclosures with safety and the animals' well-being in mind, transforming zoos from outdated spectacles into centers for preservation and learning. This evolution not only redefined the visitor experience, but also showed a shared responsibility to protect and respect the natural world. It was December 2, 2017, in the village of Baburovo, located in the Istra district, 25 miles west of Moscow. The air was cold, the ground damp from the early morning fog that clung to the barren trees. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, but no one in the village paid it much mind. Life moved slowly in Baburovo. The people here were used to the quiet, used to the isolation that came with living at the edge of civilization, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was a place where secrets were easily kept, and conversations often took place behind closed doors. Sergei Alexandrovsky, a man with a fortune made in the airline industry, lived in the heart of this village. At the time of the incident, Sergei was the CEO of Rossiya Airlines, a company he had built from the ground up. But beyond his business dealings, Sergei had another passion. Animals. In the early 2000s, he had built a private zoo at his home, a menagerie of exotic creatures that was open to select visitors. It wasn't a grand zoo by any means, but more of a collection of animals housed in small enclosures, their cages barely large enough for the creatures inside. A lion, a tiger, and a black panther were among the most notable residents. The zoo had become something of a local curiosity, although most villagers had grown accustomed to the sounds of the animal's distant roar of the lion, the unsettling grunting of the tiger pacing back and forth. While it wasn't officially marketed, the zoo was open to those who knew Sergei personally or could gain access through word of mouth. It wasn't until 2020, when the government passed a law banning the private ownership of exotic animals, that the zoo came under any real scrutiny. But by then the animals, including the panther named Milan, were protected under the law's grandfather clause, and no one paid it much attention on December 2nd. A group of 3 men from Ukraine found themselves in a Baburovo visiting a nearby acquaintance. They had been drinking heavily, reliving old memories, and telling stories of their youth. The alcohol had flowed freely, leaving them with a sense of invincibility. Their visit to the zoo had not been planned, but the alcohol prompted them to venture to Sergei's zoo. They had heard about the zoo during their stay, and with their judgment clouded by the alcohol, they thought it would be a fun idea to visit. It was late afternoon when they arrived at the cage of Milan. The black panther, the animal, lay lazily on a wooden perch, its glossy black coat almost blending into the shadows. Milan didn't seem interested in them, its eyes unblinking. As they stared back, the men, drunk and emboldened by alcohol, began to joke about feeding the panther. One of them, in a mix of alcohol-fueled confidence and foolishness, claimed he could do it. The others laughed, egging him on. A dare was a dare. After all, they hadn't considered the consequences. Nor did they care. The panther remained still, watching them with an almost indifferent gaze. The man, spurred by the challenge, walked closer to the cage, but the narrow bars kept him from reaching the animal. The lock on the gate was secure, but that didn't deter him. The alcohol had dulled his judgment, and he felt an inexplicable surge of bravado. He had been watching the panther. Its placid demeanor lulled him into a false sense of safety. He didn't think it would react. His fingers fumbled with the lock. A few seconds passed, and with a soft clink, the lock broke. The gate creaked open at that moment. The atmosphere shifted. Milan's indifference turned into focus. The panther's body tensed, its gaze now sharp and predatory. The man, in his drunken arrogance, stepped closer. Before he could react, the panther lunged. The leap was swift, a blur of black fur and powerful muscle. The man's body crashed to the stone floor, Milan's weight pressing down on him, the air filled with the sound of the man's scream. But it was cut short as the panther sank its teeth into his throat. Blood spurted from the wound, a pool quickly forming beneath them. The man's body went still, his final breaths shallow and ragged. The other 2 men stood frozen, staring in horror. Their first instinct was to flee, whether they were hoping to find help or simply running for their lives. It didn't matter. They left their friend behind, abandoning him to the cold stone floor, his body slowly growing still. The panther, having satisfied its initial bloodlust, stood up, stepping over the man's body. It sniffed the air, its instincts guiding it. The gate had been left ajar. The panther moved carefully, stepping out into the open air. It hesitated for a moment, uncertain of its surroundings, but then with a graceful movement it slipped past the gate and into the wild. Its steps silent but deliberate. Hours passed before anyone discovered the incident. The authorities were alerted, and Sergei Alexandrovsky arrived at the scene. He had been informed by a local, perhaps the one who found the body or heard the screams. Sergei's arrival was swift, but his reaction was oddly detached. He claimed the man had been drunk, someone who had wandered into the enclosure on a dare. Sergei denied knowing the man, although it was assumed by many that the man's identity was known to him. The details of the attack remained unclear, but the focus soon shifted to the panther that had escaped. The authorities, meanwhile, kept the situation quiet. They made no public warning and took a more private approach to handling the panther's escape. They did not inform the villagers of the danger lurking nearby, perhaps fearing panic or unwanted attention. As the hours passed, some villagers began to worry about the possibility of the panther being nearby. Children had been playing outside, unaware of the danger. People had been walking their dogs, oblivious to the fact that a predator had slipped past the gate. It wasn't until much later that the panther was found hidden beneath a thicket of brush, its eyes wary and alert, its muscles tensed. As it adapted to the unfamiliar terrain, the authorities managed to recapture it, but it had been hours since the attack. During that time, it could have been anywhere. Sergei, ever the protector of his animals, insisted that the panther should not be put down. The local reaction, however, was one of anger. The zoo, still open for business, became a symbol of fear and frustration in the community. Many felt that Sergei's failure to secure the animals properly had put their lives in danger. There were whispers of how had Sergei himself been the victim instead of the Ukrainian man, perhaps the zoo would be shut down, and the neighborhood would be free from fear. It was a peaceful morning on March 18, 2017, in South Africa's Free State province. The sun rose steadily over the sprawling grounds of the Tiger Canyon Wildlife Reserve, casting a warm glow across the Savannah, a 3-year-old boy with his bright blonde hair and infectious curiosity, was already outside absorbed in a game with his favorite toy trucks. Was the heart of his family, a lively and adventurous child, who loved spending time outdoors for his family life on the reserve, was a perfect mix of work and nature. But that morning would take a deadly turn. No one could have foreseen Tiger Canyon, established as a pioneering wildlife reserve, was renowned for its innovative approach to big cat conservation. Located in South Africa's Free State Province, the reserve was a brainchild of acclaimed filmmaker and conservationist John Vardy. Initially founded to support the conservation of Bengal tigers, an endangered species native to Asia, the reserve soon expanded its efforts to house and protect a variety of big cats, lions, leopards, and cheetahs, found refuge within its sprawling, meticulously designed enclosures, which stretched across hundreds of acres. Tiger Canyon became a global leader in blending conservation and ecotourism, drawing visitors from around the world to witness these majestic creatures in semi-wild conditions. The reserve prided itself on its commitment to safety, employing strict protocols and advanced enclosure designs to minimize risks for both animals and humans. However, the events of the previous night revealed the fragility of even the most carefully maintained systems during an informal after-hours gathering involving staff and visitors. A critical mistake was made. One staff member tasked with retrieving supplies late in the evening failed to properly latch the gate to the cheetah enclosure. Though the gate appeared closed, it was left unsecured, allowing one of the reserve's cheetahs to push it open and venture beyond the confines of its habitat unnoticed. In the darkness, the animal roamed freely across the grounds, its instincts sharpening as the night wore on. By morning, the predator was dangerously close to the human-occupied areas, setting the stage for a devastating encounter. As his father left to feed the tigers on the other side of the reserve, Sophie, his mother prepared breakfast in the kitchen, leaving her young son to play on the grass. Outside their bungalow, the family, familiar with the routine safety of the reserve, had no reason to suspect any danger. Meanwhile, the escaped cheetah, curious and driven by instinct, prowled the grounds unnoticed. Its sharp senses led it toward the sounds and smells of human activity, and its gaze fell on who was happily engrossed in his game. The cheetah approached silently, its movements calculated and precise, unaware of the predator. Closing in, continued to push his toy truck through the dirt, singing softly to himself. With a sudden leap, the cheetah pounced, pinning the boy to the ground. Its claws sank into his small frame, and its powerful jaws clamped onto his neck. Screamed the sound cutting through the quiet morning air. Sophie, hearing her son's cries, rushed outside. What she saw stopped her cold. The cheetah was on top of her son, its jaws locked around his neck. She screamed for help as she ran toward them, her heart pounding in terror. A nearby gardener, alerted by her cry, sprinted to intervene without hesitation. He grabbed the cheetah, managing to force it off the child. The cheetah snarled and resisted, but eventually fled into the bushes, disappearing from sight. Lay on the ground, blood pooling around him. Sophie knelt beside him, desperately applying pressure to his wounds. To stop the bleeding, the gardener called for emergency assistance, and within minutes, a helicopter arrived to airlift to a hospital in Bloemfontein, the nearest city with advanced medical facilities. At the hospital in Bloemfontein, doctors and nurses immediately began treating severe injuries. The most critical wound, inflicted by the cheetah's powerful jaws, had caused extensive damage to his neck, severing vital arteries and cutting off oxygen to his brain. Despite intubation and efforts to stabilize him, the trauma had already caused irreversible brain damage. Over 48 agonizing hours, his parents stayed by his side as specialists worked tirelessly, though his condition showed no signs of improvement. The lack of oxygen had caused severe brain swelling, leaving no hope for recovery. On the third day, the family made the heartbreaking decision to remove him from life support. Surrounded by his grieving parents, passed away peacefully, leaving behind a family forever changed by the preventable tragedy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Tiger Canyon implemented stricter safety measures, ensuring that all enclosures were secured with spring-loaded latches. The staff member responsible for the unlatched gate faced disciplinary action and was later charged with involuntary manslaughter, but avoided imprisonment due to the unintentional nature of the oversight. His parents, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss, left the reserve for them. Tiger Canyon would forever be associated with the tragic death of their beloved son, It was a bright summer afternoon at the local zoo, where the sounds of children's laughter and the distant calls of animals filled the air. A 22-year-old handler had always found solace among the creatures. She cared for her dream born from childhood visits to the zoo had come true. When she was hired as a full-time handler over the years, she had worked with a variety of animals, but there was one she had formed an unbreakable bond with. Walter, a 10-year-old chimpanzee born at the zoo. Walter was no ordinary chimp. Unlike the aggressive reputation his kind often carried, he was gentle and playful, always eager to interact with visitors. Had raised him from infancy after his mother died of an unknown illness. When he was just a baby, she spent countless hours with him, talking, playing, and forming a bond that was nearly inseparable. As he grew, Walter became the zoo's main attraction, drawing crowds with his friendly antics. His behavior defied the natural tendencies of his species, and he was adored by staff and visitors alike. Over time, and the other staff grew complacent in their belief that Walter's gentle nature made him immune to the violent tendencies typically seen in chimpanzees. They trusted that their bond would keep him in check. But beneath the surface of Walter's calm demeanor, the instincts of a wild creature remained. The balance between human and animal was always fragile. One afternoon, a routine visit to Walter's enclosure turned into a nightmare. Busy tending to other animals nearby, was unaware that Walter had managed to break free from his pen. Chaos erupted. The sound of screaming filled the air as Walter, agitated and disoriented, began rampaging through the zoo. Visitors ran in all directions seeking refuge as Walter threw objects and charged at anyone in his path. His once playful eyes were now wide with confusion and rage. When heard the commotion, she rushed toward the noise. She found him standing in the middle of the path, his eyes fixed on her, recognition flashing in them for a brief moment. But something had changed. The calm, playful companion she had known for years was gone, replaced by a ferocious animal. Walter screamed a guttural, shrill sound and charged at her with a violence she had never anticipated. Despite her size and strength was no match for Walter's power. He tackled her to the ground, his hands gripping her face with terrifying force. She felt his sharp teeth sink into her flesh as he began tearing at her skin, biting and mauling with a primal fury. The pain was unbearable, and her screams were drowned out by the horrified cries of the zoo's visitors, some frozen in terror, others too shocked to capture anything. But the blur of violence unfolding before them fought back with every ounce of strength. But Walter was relentless. His powerful arms ripped into her, biting through her face, neck, and shoulders. Deep, savage marks left her body bloodied and torn. The agony was overwhelming, but her thoughts were not on her suffering. They were on the animal she had raised. This was Walter, her friend. And yet he was no longer the gentle chimp she had known. Minutes stretched like hours as Walter continued his brutal attack, throwing against the ground, his primal instincts now fully in control. Her body was covered in blood as she screamed his name, hoping to reach him, to make him understand. But it was useless. The connection they once shared was severed. Could no longer see the chimp she had cared for, only an animal driven by raw instinct. The chaos continued, and time seemed to lose all meaning. The zoo's emergency response team arrived, armed with tranquilizers and tools designed to subdue dangerous animals. In a tense and desperate few moments, they managed to neutralize Walter, though not without difficulty. The staff rushed to his side, pulling her from the unconscious grip of the chimp and whisking her away for immediate medical attention. The hospital became the battlefield for her survival. Surgeons worked tirelessly to repair the extensive damage. Multiple fractures, a punctured lung, and deep lacerations. The recovery process was long and painful, but survived. Yet even after the physical wounds healed, something in her had changed. The person who had once walked fearlessly among the animals now found herself haunted by the memory of Walter's attack. The zoo, after much deliberation, made the heartbreaking decision to euthanize Walter. It was the only course of action left. The chimp, once a symbol of connection between human and animal, could no longer be trusted, for the loss was profound. Despite the violence he had inflicted upon her, she could not escape the feeling of failure. Walter had been more than an animal to her. He had been a companion, and now that bond was broken forever. In the years that followed, continued to work at the zoo, her body bearing the scars of the attack. She struggled with anxiety, depression, and the lingering fear of the animals she once loved. But she refused to give up on her passion. Slowly, she began to regain her confidence, learning to trust the animals again, though always with caution. In the heart of Uzbekistan, Where ancient silk roads once carried treasures between East and West, lies a modern city, struggling to maintain its aging institutions, among them a Sovetera Zoo, where magnificent beasts paced behind weathered bars, and where one man's desire to impress would lead to his devastating end. A man had worked at the city zoo for over 15 years, his callous hands and weathered face telling the story of countless days. Spent tending to the facility's residents. At 44, he was neither young nor old, but experienced enough to know better than to do what he was about to attempt. His monthly salary of 15,000 tenge, roughly $35, barely covered his basic needs, but it was his new relationship that made him yearn for something more impressive than being just another underpaid zookeeper. Marina, his girlfriend of 3 months, had captured his heart with her youth and vitality. At 28, she was significantly younger then, and her constant social media presence made him increasingly aware of the gulf between their worlds. She would often show him viral videos of other zookeepers interacting with their animals, asking why he had never shared such exciting content of his own work. The lion enclosure had always been the zoo's main attraction. 3 magnificent African lions, one male and 2 females, had been born in captivity and raised at the facility. The male, whom the staff called Sultan, was particularly impressive with his full mane and powerful build. Despite their captive upbringing, these were not tame animals, something knew all too well from years of careful feeding and cleaning routines. On that fateful morning, in December 2024, before the zoo opened to the public arrived earlier than usual, the sun had barely risen over the Soviet block buildings surrounding the zoo, and a light frost still covered the ground. His colleagues would later recall how he had seemed distracted lately, constantly checking his phone and talking about his new relationship. What didn't realize was that these apex predators, despite years of captivity, retained every instinct of their wild ancestors. African lions, capable of bringing down prey weighing up to 1,000 pounds, possess jaw strength measuring 1,000 pounds per square inch. A single swipe of their paw can crush a human skull, and their territorial instincts remain as sharp as their 4-inch canines. The footage recovered from his phone would later reveal his final moments. He approached the enclosure with his phone held high around 5 a.m., recording himself as he spoke to the lions in the enclosure. The animals, usually still drowsy at this hour, began to stir. As he drew closer, then, in a decision that would prove fatal, he did the unthinkable. He entered through the service door. The attack was immediate and devastating. Sultan, the male lion, initially remained still, watching as approached. Moments later, he moved toward the zookeeper, followed by the 2 lionesses. One of the lions eventually clamped its jaws down on his arm. His phone, still recording, captured his first screams before being knocked from his grip. With over 800 pounds of muscle and raw power bearing down on him, any chance of escape vanished. The lions continued their attack, overpowering him with ease. There was no one else present at that early hour. Had entered the enclosure alone, and the zoo had not yet opened for the day. His absence was only noticed when the other employees arrived later that morning, and by then, it was far too late. Zoo staff rushed to the lion exhibit once they realized something was wrong. But by then the lions had already mauled him beyond saving. It took animal control officers over an hour to secure the enclosure before they could recover his remains. His phone was later found several feet away, its screen shattered, but its recording intact, preserving the horrific final moments of his life. The tragedy quickly gained international attention, with media outlets worldwide reporting on the shocking incident. News platforms highlighted growing concerns over zoo safety protocols and the dangers of close human interaction with wild animals. The footage of his final moments, which surfaced online, became a focal point of discussion about the risks zookeepers face, fueling debates on whether stricter regulations should be implemented. Thanks for watching these chilling stories of zoo animal attacks. If you're interested in more real-life encounters with wild animals, we've got plenty more waiting for you. Just click the video on screen now, and we'll see you there. What was your reaction to these harrowing stories? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more gripping tales from the animal kingdom.